Is the Nigerian media space getting uncomfortably tight, with the government leaping down on broadcast stations from a great height? It's fined 4 broadcasters, including Multi-Choice Nigeria, 5 million naira, or about $12,000 each, for airing a BBC documentary on the activities of bandit gangs in the Northwest. The National Broadcasting Commission said the documentary glorified the activities of bandits, undermined national security, and contravened the provisions of the Nigeria Broadcasting Code. But the broadcasters insisted they were acting overwhelmingly in the public interest by shedding light on the nettlesome issue of banditry and how it's affecting the lives of millions in Nigeria. They said they were currently weighing their options, which may include challenging the decision of the National Broadcasting Commission. So, are the battle lines drawn once again between the government and the media? We ask, are the Nigerian authorities attempting to choke out any reporting they don't like? Is NBC violating the right of Nigerians to be informed about the nightmare of crime they face, a nightmare that's cost thousands of lives? Or is NBC acting well within its scope and in the best interest of national security? I'll be joined by the Director General of the Nigerian Broadcasting Commission, Balarabe Ilela, and on the opposing side by the veteran journalist and Executive Director of the International Press Center, Lanre Arogundade. Plus, we have our analyst who will help us understand whether something has gone disturbingly wrong with the regulation of the broadcast media in Nigeria. I'm Charles Anyegolu, and this is Arise Prime Time. So, in a world in which armed criminals, known locally as bandits, have kidnapped thousands of Nigerians over the past 2 years, killing many of them, there is absolute unbridled anger in some quarters towards the Nigerian government for this sanction against broadcasters who aired a story that free speech activists see as overwhelmingly in the public interest. Those democracy activists are raising the alarm over what they say are erosions to freedom of expression in recent years in Nigeria, including last year's ban on the social media platform Twitter. They argue that with a presidential election in February approaching, the deteriorating security situation that's being witnessed across the country could play a prominent role. And it is documentaries like this that offer insight and suggestions into the way out of the crisis. Well, in a moment, we'll be joined by the Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission, Balarabe Shehu Ilela. But first, for his reaction to this move by the National Broadcasting Commission, I'm joined now from our studios in Lagos by the veteran journalist and Executive Director of the International Press Center, Lanre Arogundade. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, where do you stand on this decision by the NBC to go after the broadcasters for airing that BBC documentary on banditry?
Well, my stand and the stand of the International Press Center, and I'm sure the stand of press freedom organizations in Nigeria, is that the decision of the NBC is arbitrary. It violates the basic tenets or the basic canons of the rule of law. All that happened was that the information minister threatened that Daily Trust TV and the others would be sanctioned because of the documentary which they broadcast on banditry in Nigeria, titled Banditry in Nigeria, The Inside Story. The NBC thereafter invited Daily Trust TV to its office and handed this order on them that they should pay a fine of 5 million naira because they had allegedly violated sections 311, 312.1 and 311.1 of the Nigeria Broadcasting Code. Daily Trust was not given a query to explain its own side of the story. Daily Trust was not warned. So essentially, the NBC, and perhaps the NBC and the information minister decided on their own that Daily Trust TV and others had committed an offense. They investigated that offense, and on their own came to judgment that they had done wrong. So we have a situation where an agency that is funded with taxpayers' money had decided to be the accuser, the prosecutor, or if you like, the investigator, and the judge in its own case. That is a violation of the basic tenet of the rule of law, in the sense that there was no fair hearing. And I hope you are still hearing me.
I can hear you loud and clear. Go on.
So what we're saying is that, assuming without conceding that Daily Trust had committed an offense, Daily Trust TV, that Trust TV had committed an offense, what one would expect is that this offense will be laid before them, then they will be allowed to state their defense, and then you can then have maybe some level of sanction or judgment passed against the stations. But this just didn't happen in this case. And so, as we said in our statement, it's like once an agency of government feels something has gone wrong, then the next thing is that you just decide and put down a sanction. We can look at the peculiarities of this case, we can come to that. But sometimes you just ask yourselves, why do government act like this? And we can look at this from many angles. We can look at it from the angle of press freedom, violation of media rights, which is very, very clear. But we can also look at it even from the economic angle, the fact that you are having an economic crisis, and you don't have government thinking that organizations that provide employment, even when they commit offense, there are ways you treat them. Because a fine of 5 million in the state of economy of Nigeria today is hefty. It's like you are saying you can as well shut down. In any case, so we are saying that, well, let the workers can go home. I mean, they can lose their jobs simply because you feel that a documentary has violated or has glorified banditry. The question then is, has this documentary actually done that? I've listened to that documentary again and again. And I feel that government, as a matter of fact, ought to have commended the media organization for the painstaking effort that they made. It was a balanced report.
Right.
It was a report that looked at the history of banditry, in the North. It was a report that looked at all dimensions. It's a report that will be useful,
right,
for everybody that is interested in the safety and security of Nigeria.
Okay, we're going to have to balance this discussion, obviously, because there are two sides to this story, which is why it is a dispute of sorts. So you don't think that the government has a point when it says that BBC report glorifies the activities of bandits and undermines national security?
Okay, I do not agree that it glorified. It didn't. First, when you watch the documentary, it started with a kind of historical excursion into the roots of the banditry. And I found that very, very interesting and very, very revealing, particularly in the context of the crisis between farmers and herders in certain parts of the North. It's a kind of history that is missing in conversations about banditry in Nigeria. That even if you are looking at it, in the context of, the so-called, Fulani question, you even had a situation where you even had, in the course of this crisis, Fulani versus Fulani. The Fulanis who had been in Nigeria, the Fulani, that came. And then they interviewed different people on how this, developed. The fact that even at a stage in this crisis, you even had, a Fulani leader who was influential, who was mediating, between, the farmers, the herders, or even the Hausas and the Fulanis, but who unfortunately got killed. And then that led to a kind of, mission of revenge. Then in that documentary, the governor of Katsina State, one of the states where we have had this banditry, was interviewed. And he spoke extensively about what the government on his part, what they have been able to do. how, they try to dialogue, the various things they put in place, and so on and so forth. And of course, naturally, for that kind of documentary, they also spoke with one of, the bandit leaders, Toji, who was not just being in the news for the first time. This guy had featured in the news. Now, we also have a situation where even, governors, Islamic leaders like Gumi had gone to meet with these bandits. All this had been reported. So in a sense, you really ask yourself, in what way exactly did that, documentary glorify, terrorism or banditry? They didn't praise them. They didn't commend them. They didn't say this is what you should be doing. But they tried to lay as many facts as possible bare so that peace and conflict experts can begin to look at the roots of this crisis and ask themselves, maybe this is the way to go. So that security agencies could have an idea of the motive of these bandits, what is really driving them, and their modus operandi. These are the kind of things that I personally saw in that documentary. But then that is my own point of view. And I concede that government or the National Broadcasting Commission could have a different view, a different way of looking at it. Now, when you have that kind of situation, what you then do is to at least issue what you call a query. Look at the matters, give them the opportunity to come before you to defend yourselves. And this is the problem that we have with the National Broadcasting Commission, in the sense that when it comes to taking decisions that may have far-reaching implications for a media organization, and like I said, a fine of 5 million naira could lead to job losses in the kind of economy that we find ourselves.
Right.
There must be a system where that organization can at least make an appeal. But it's like a finality.
Yeah.
You either pay or we shut you down.
Right.
That should not be allowed in a democracy.
Well, that's a good point, I have to say. And let me just make the point that obviously there are two sides to the story. We are expecting the arrival of the Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission, Balarabe Shehu Ilela. He did promise, gave his word that he would be here for the program. We haven't seen him yet, but we're hoping that he'll be able to come in to put his own side of the story. But while that is taking place, let me ask you this. You're calling for that decision to be reversed because you consider the imposition of the fine, according to your statements, to be an act of injustice and what you called an assault on media freedom. Do you, in all clear-eyed assessment, think that the NBC might reverse its decision? If so, in what circumstances?
Well, it's good that you are going to have on here the Director General of the NBC, and I'm hopeful that by the time he comes on here and says the side of the story, he might see reason with us that we're not saying, and nobody is saying that the media should not be conflict sensitive. And we're also even considering the fact, like I said, I've not seen anything wrong, but they might have seen something wrong. But the process of arriving at a decision is also very, very important, because you have to take a lot of factors into consideration. And I'm hopeful that when they look at this, then they can also think back and say that perhaps this is not the right way for us to go. Because the essence of they call it a regulatory body. It's a regulation. It's not a strangulation. You're not supposed, to strangulate. And the conversation we're having here is not peculiar to Nigeria. Let me just cast our mind back to the time when the Western world, America in particular, was waging war against the Taliban in Afghanistan. And the Voice of America decided to have an interview with the leader of the Taliban then, I think it was Malan Umar, which the government didn't like, because they felt that giving him voice was like promoting him. And the journalists in Voice of Nigeria argued otherwise, that they felt that, look, it's also it's necessary for people to have an idea of the mindsets of these elements and how they think. So the point I'm making, therefore, is that the documentary by Trust TV and others is actually not for government alone. It's for the public. It's for the people. It's for everybody affected by this war. It's for the average Fulani person. It's for the average Hausa person. It's for the average Nigerian. for them to have an understanding. You know, there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. There are a lot of disinformation and misinformation about banditry that we have in Nigeria. You must have heard people say, oh, this whole thing is being, sponsored, by government. It's the handiwork of government. Or it's the handiwork, of Fulanis. A particular tribe wants to overrun, the country. But now you have a media organization that, in any case, if you look at the ownership is traced to the north, coming out with different facts and information on the root cause of this crisis, the trajectory it has undertaken, telling us that, in fact, in the places where this crisis had actually assumed very bloody dimension, the people once lived together, peacefully. They went to that history. They told us the history of how, in fact, when there are particular celebrations, the Hausas will go and celebrate with the Fulanis and so on. These are positive stories. This is what we teach in conflict-sensitive reporting, that even when we report the bad side of conflict, we should also report good things in conflict, because it is not everything that happens in conflict that is negative. You have communities attacking themselves, but at the same time in those communities, you have their children playing football together. And I'm sure that almost all of us in Nigeria have celebrated the victory of Toby, Amuson. So I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to listen to see how this documentary has actually, glorified.
Well, I'm going to come in there.
Like I said, it's a documentary that is.
Yeah, I'm going to come in there. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to come in there and say that I have also watched the documentary, and I saw absolutely nothing wrong with airing it. But we have to obviously concede that if the government might have its own perspective, which it is perfectly entitled to, with regard to issues of national security. You did mention the fact that the Voice of America interviewed the leader of the Taliban at the height of the war between the Americans and the Taliban. And there was justification because they wanted to know, the thinking of the leaders of the Taliban. But you also have to bear in mind that in places like Northern Ireland, for example, at the height of the crisis with the IRA, Margaret Thatcher, and I was a journalist working in Northern Ireland, and Margaret Thatcher at one point placed some D-notices around the coverage and limited the amount of exposure that would be given to leaders of the IRA in the interest of national security. So there is an argument to be made both ways, although I have to say that in this particular instance, I'm rather inclined to agree more with people who err on the side of the documentary being broadcast than those who are angry that it was broadcast. But as I said, there are two sides to a story. What I would like to ask you is this. We're going to take a break in the next minute and a half or so. What happens if the government remains adamant and sticks to its guns? What would be your next move?
Well, I wouldn't disclose on here what my next move could be, but I'm happy that Trust TV itself has said that they were weighing, their options, and I feel that this is not an issue of the International Press Center alone. All of us should weigh our options. Everybody that wants stability in Nigeria should weigh their options. Nigeria Bar Association should weigh its option and look at the legal side of this matter. The Nigerian Guild of Editors should weigh its option and look at the implication of this for media freedom. Now, as to the point that you raised, and don't forget that in my analysis, I had said that I didn't see anything wrong, and I've also considered that in case the NBC had seen something wrong, there's also the question of process, whether we can say that the way and manner they arrive at decision meets the basic tenets of the rule of law in terms of fair hearing. We need to look at that. Now, if the government is also saying that the media in Nigeria should not interview bandits or whatever, let them come out with that announcement. I mean, the Yoruba people have a proverb that says that where there is no law, you cannot say somebody has committed an offense. I think government should be courageous enough to come out and say that, okay, you in Nigerian media, don't report this. If they do that, I'm sure the media will then react, in its own way. But we haven't really done that, and some group of media organizations have gone their own way to provide information that they believe would help the resolution, of this crisis, and on the basis of that, they are being sanctioned. For me, it's like a threat. Now the problem is, what do you report? What do you not, report? And I know that in all situations of crisis, yes, the security agencies would always have their own guidance and so on. There will always be dialogue. I feel that is what we should see more. If security agencies feel that some certain way of providing information on the body can compromise security, what I know happens in all societies is that security agencies have regular dialogue with media proprietors. They take themselves into confidence. But we should also realize that at the end of the day, the public also wants information that keeps their mind, at rest.
Okay.
And the kind of information that flowed, from these documentary is such that will be helpful, to the people, because the documentary itself addresses a variety of audiences,
okay.
including
you've
the
made that
citizens
point
and
quite
so on and so forth.
robustly, and we're going to take a break, but please stay with us. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead. We're still expecting the Director General of the NBC to join us in the discussions. But when we return, we'll be continuing the conversation with my guest in Lagos, the Executive Director of the International Press Center. And we'll also be joined by today's analyst for his take on the big prime time stories of the day. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we try to get answers about the most important questions of the day from a range of newsmakers and global experts. I'm Charles Aniagolu. So, the Nigerian government leaping down on broadcast stations from a great height, fining 4 broadcasters, including MultiChoice Nigeria, 5 million naira, or about $12,000 each, for airing a BBC documentary on the activities of bandit gangs in the Northwest. The National Broadcasting Commission said the documentary glorified the activities of bandits, undermined national security, and contravened the provisions of the Nigeria Broadcasting Code. But the broadcasters insisted they were acting overwhelmingly in the public interest by shedding light on the nettlesome issue of banditry and how it's affecting the lives of millions in Nigeria. We heard the opposing side earlier in the program arguing out his case as the battle lines are drawn between the government and the media. Well, my guest is still the veteran journalist and executive director of the International Press Center, Lanre Arogundade. He's in Lagos. And also, to give us a sense of perspective and balance in all this, I'm joined now in the studio by the political affairs commentator, Arise News analyst and lecturer at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. And of course, Professor Adeniyi is a lecturer in mass communication, so we're very glad to have him and to have the benefit of his analysis. So let me come straight away to you, Professor Abiodun. What do you make of this latest tiff between the National Broadcasting Commission and sections of the media?
Well, I think it's another unfortunate turn because we know what the media does in every system, and most particularly in a democracy. We know that the media provides the oxygen, it lubricates the institutions of a democratic experiment, a democratic dispensation. And it's even all the more so in a growing democracy like our own, where information is most needed. Information has a way of helping the system in different regards. It helps the citizens, helps the institutions, and helps government itself, to function fine. But when we're beginning to have a situation where directly or indirectly we are seeing stifling, through fines, it limits the ability of the journalist, of the practitioner to function to the optimum, realizing that, media is somewhat, something that has to do with the subjective, with the intellect, and the intellect needs freedom to flourish. But when an atmosphere of unfreedom is crippling in through fines, through sanctions, through intimidation, then of course we are treading on a path that is definitely not that's very, very unfortunate and unsalutary. I would rather have wanted a situation where the government will have been slightly more circumspect and engaged, practitioners that they consider erring. Yes, they had their point. They said, that kind of documentary will enamor the bandits. It will inspire others, and it's like they are glorifying criminals. Well, that's the point, But why not engage the practitioners, those who are sanctioning, with those points in the first instance, rather than coming in with a sledgehammer? That's an area I think government should begin to think about. Engagement is key. It's about consultation, consensus building, peace building. And when we're talking about peace, we're not just talking about the peace on the streets. We're also talking about professional peace. And professional peace is primus. It's most important in professions, in jobs, occupations that has to do with the intellect, where the media is an important one at that.
Yes, and you made some very good points there. And as I mentioned previously, we were going to give the government the chance, the NBC, to respond to some of the things that have been said here. The Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission was supposed to join us on the program. He did give his word that he was going to come. We haven't seen him so far, so I think it is perhaps at this point fair to assume that he's probably not going to make it, and I can't judge as to why he didn't, but we have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But let me stay with you for the moment, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. I'll come back to you, Lanre Arogundade, in Lagos in a minute. But as we mentioned, Professor Adeniyi, you are a lecturer in mass communication yourself, so it's important your assessment of this case and how you see it. I mean, do you think the Nigerian authorities, as has been alleged, are trying to strangle or choke out any reporting it does not like, and is not acting in the public interest, but more as somebody put it, an attack dog of the government?
Yeah, I had Larry earlier on, and he was very exhaustive, summing that at the end of the day, it looks like the government is not interested in regulating, but in strangulating. And this is not far from what I think is the truth, even if it is subtle, even if it is subterranean. But we can see it gradually and slowly coming. It might not be the gongo, strong arm tactics of the military, but sometimes when you over-regulate, it can also be stifling. Remember what I said about a profession that is largely, that has to do with the intellect, where you have to think, you have to make judgments, these things are largely subjective, and they depend on quite a number of things, on the environment, the economic ability, the business prospect and progress of the organization, and such other things, sometimes beyond the making of the practitioners, as the case could be. So some of these conditions, are definitely overwhelming. And the professional, that a journalist, for instance, is struggling, is in the middle of this, trying to navigate it, and government is coming, on the other hand, to intervene in a way that might look disturbing, like we are witnessing. It becomes really worrisome, especially in a situation where the media is often courted, the media is often asked to support the programs, policies, and directions of the government, So when you need them as partners in progress, as a section of that should be part of your developmental effort, of course, what you need to do in that situation is to always strive for understanding, integration and inclusion, and not direct or indirect exclusion through sanctioning, as the case could be. Yes, do not forget that I said, I understand the position of government. They have their own position. They are also Nigerians. They are also citizens. They're probably in their own mindset. They are working in the interest of the public, like you alluded to. But all these things have to be put in context in trying to do your own job as well. Consider the position of the other. And in considering the position of the other, there has to be a meeting point. And that meeting point can be established through engagement, which the government probably didn't do. Coming from top to the bottom without hearing from the bottom is definitely not how it should be in a situation where it should be about partnership, it should be about understanding. And understanding, of course, we work towards, it's very, very helpful to progress in any system and society, Charles.
Right. So, I understand the things we would like to see happen, Professor Adeniyi. In an ideal world would like these things, there'd be dialogue and there'd be, consultations and all the rest of it. But is the NBC acting within its scope to do what it did? Because it's important for the audience and the general public to understand what the rules and regulations that govern the scope of NBC are, and whether or not it has the right and the authority to do what it did.
Very well. There was a build-up to this, Charles. The information minister addressed the press, and of course criticized the airing of those documentaries, and said, of course, they will move on to getting the NBC to look at the valid rules, regulations that they can apply towards sanction, and eventually we have this happening. So what it means ordinarily, without necessarily opening the books, is that, of course, there are valid reasons why they can intervene and sanction this media organization. But we have to make a difference between social justice and legal justice, between moral justice and legal justice, and between truth and justice. It's not all the time that you want to wield the big stick looking exceptionally at black letter laws. If you do that all the time, of course, that means the society will be like a system that has no soul. And every society should have a soul. There should be a conscience to everything. There are different ways in which you can look at things. It's only when you engage them and they disagree with you, or when they repeat it, then of course you can be thinking of wielding the big stick. Do not forget, this is not the first time that government is doing this. I remember China's television was once sanctioned, 5 million again. Even a Rise television, it's becoming a practice which is definitely not helpful, irrespective of the argument of government of the power of the broadcast media. We know what the power is. Sometimes it can be very instantaneous, it can be momentary, but they shouldn't also forget that practitioners have some oaths, some social responsibility, professional responsibility that they have to subscribe to. And this responsibility is one of revealing information, information that probably are hidden, have not been discovered. And of course, oftentimes we also say that our job is not necessarily too different from those of agencies, just that agencies work through compulsion, but we walk through the voluntary means. And of course, through the voluntary means, the practitioners have been able to make these meaningful revelations, helpful to understanding and ratiocination. So what I expect government to do is that, other than commending them, if you feel aggrieved, talk to them. Once more, let's have understanding, rather than wielding the big stick, Charles.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And thank you for your patience, Mr. Arogundade in Lagos. He is, of course, a veteran journalist and executive director of the International Press Center. Let me come to you, Mr. Arogundade. You had mentioned at the outset, when we were talking previously, that you were hoping that the NBC might reverse its decision, and presumably it's coming under considerable pressure. You can't obviously do that on your own. What's been the reaction of other organizations and champions of press freedom in Nigeria for your call to them to rise in unison against this move by NBC?
Sorry, I didn't get that question properly.
Right, okay. Well, that's a rather long question, so that means I'd have to go through it again, which I'm rather not looking at. But can you hear me now? Are you able to hear me at all?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. What I said was that you had mentioned at the outset that you wanted to the NBC to reverse its decision to impose a fine on these broadcasters, and you were saying that you can't obviously do it alone. And I was wondering what's been the reaction of other organizations that deal with press freedom in Nigeria to your call for them to rise in unison against this move by NBC.
Well, I'm aware of the fact that the Guild of Editors, the president of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, Malam Mustafa Isa, this morning at a workshop of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, also condemned the fine imposed on Trust TV and the others. So to that extent, we are already getting reactions. And I'm sure that if it becomes necessary, these organizations will come together and push a common position. He did say in the morning that the NBC should actually reverse that decision. So the demand by NPC is already being echoed by the demand of IPC is already being echoed by some of the organizations that we called upon to rise to this occasion, which I think is fair enough. And it's not ruled out that the Guild of Editors, the AUJ and others, may also want to enter into dialogue with the NBC or the government if we can actually, demarcate or separate the two now. But hopefully that could happen, and that could also help to resolve this matter. The point we're making is that we are all stakeholders in the Nigerian enterprise. And just like Professor Adeniyi said, we did concede that government could have its own point. The security agents could also have their own point. But it's about how you make that point. One of the problems we have with the National Broadcasting Commission is that if you look at these fines, it often comes from the Director General. And there are actually legal precedents. There's a decision of the Court of Appeal that says that regulatory agencies don't have the power to impose the kind of fines. And we stated that in the paper that we submitted during the public hearing on the bill seeking the amendment of the National Broadcasting Act. I can't quote it from on top of my head now, but we did say that. The other thing that we have also said, because we're also looking at the NBC itself, like I said, it's all a case of, oh, you've done wrong, and then the Director General, who is just like a kind of administrator, hands down the view. The National Broadcasting Commission is supposed to have a council. That council has not been constituted. And one of our demands is that the NBC should have a council. That council should be composed of representatives of the government, representatives of media professional groups, representatives of vital interest groups in Nigeria, the Bar Association, the women, the youths, the people living with disability. They must be on that council. And that council must be composed based on the nomination of the president and the approval of the National Assembly. It is only the media regulatory bodies whose councils or boards are constituted without the National Assembly being involved. It doesn't happen with all other regulatory agencies. So what we're saying is that let there be checks and balances. We're not saying that the NBC does not have the power to say a media organization has violated the Nigerian Broadcasting Code, although there are question marks over this code, because the code in question is supposed to be the 6th edition, and that code has not met with the approval of the stakeholders in the broadcasting industry. But that is another matter for another day. So in this kind of instance now, where you say, oh, this documentary, glorified, banditry, if you have such a board or a council in place, it can then act as a kind of appellate body. So the DG lays down the allegation or the offense, then the media organization defends itself. When it comes to whether you should impose a fine that might jeopardize a business, I think that it shouldn't just be the office that looks at the allegation, that makes the allegation, that would also sentence or make a fine at that. These are the issues before us. And I would like Nigerians to know that the Nigerian media does not say that the Nigerian media does not say that we can do anything. We have the Code of Ethics of Journalism in Nigeria. When it comes to election, we have the Nigerian Media of Election Coverage, Code of Election Coverage. All these codes, stipulates responsibilities that say that we should do everything possible to avoid things that might lead to conflict or crime in our society.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for that. Very comprehensive, but also just well sort of outlined the position there. And let me just point out that the people who negotiate with bandits and who have helped to rescue and free a lot of the people who were kidnapped by them. I mean, we had them on, one of them on Arise News this morning. They themselves, who are very close to those bandits, say it is important to know the extent of the problem, and they support the airing of this documentary, and to them it's almost perverse to sanction the people who are trying to show these bandits for what they truly are. So that coming from them. But let me come to you, Professor Adeniyi. The broadcasters who were fined, notably Trust TV, saying they are weighing their options, which may or may not include challenging the powers of the National Broadcasting Commission to impose this kind of fine. Now, tell us more about what the options are that are open to them.
Well, I don't think they have much option anyway, other than challenging it through the courts of law. You know, maybe protesting to NBC, and of course complaining to higher authorities. The options are not too many really, apart from resort to court. But their response is also very good, very elegant. I don't know what else they will have to say other than to say that, okay, they are weighing the options, you know. And of course, they are not the first. We have had some other organizations going through this experience. But I sympathize with them, considering that Trust TV is relatively new and that they are doing well ordinarily. They have an area of specialization. I understand it's documentary, and we know what documentary does in terms of education, in terms of entertainment, and the provision of information and awareness. So if we are having that TV station, having that unique area of specialization, is very commendable for the fact that it's going to spice off the parcel of broadcast stations that we have in this country. And of course, it just means that media ecosystem is becoming much more robust, much more vibrant.
But it also means that they've been thrown in the deep end, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. It also means that
if they lose in court, assuming they go to court, then that portends great dangers for them.
I would rather advise them not to go to court. You know, they should just take it in its strides and see how they can get around it. You know, because they are still new. They do not need the rigors of court process. You know, it can be very, very turgid. You know, very unpredictable.
Absolutely.
And of course, they need to concentrate on their professional development and do the job the way they are doing it to the best of their ability, mindful of the fact that there's a big brother watching somewhere that might want to come at some point in time. And this is very unfortunate, really, because they need that level of freedom. Freedom is not just physical, it's also psychological. When you operate in an atmosphere of freedom at the level of the psychology, it affects your ability to think. And when you cannot think properly, when you don't have that liberty to think, to free your mind, your power of expression, your power of productivity and efficiency will also be limited. And that's not what the average journalist, the average broadcaster or presenter needs.
Okay. I want to thank you very much indeed, both of you. You put your points across very robustly, and particularly Professor Adeniyi striking a balance for us down the middle, and of course Lanre Arogundade in Lagos, who is the executive director of the International Press Center, and it is a respected veteran journalist. Thank you very much indeed. Arise News analyst as well, lecturer at Bayes University, and political commentator, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and Lagos, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.